It is a pity that you cannot tell us how to recognize these aliens.
Well, theoretically, there are already possibilities for people today to recognize extraterrestrials. To do so, one would need a mixture of specially adapted drugs, natural drugs that are rather unusual. So no LSD, MDMA, mescaline or similar artificially synthesized stuff. This means that the right combination of drugs can be used, but the most important thing is missing in the effect that can be achieved. This is also one reason why these artificially created or synthesized drugs exist at all. They have a different effect than their natural counterparts, which is why people are controlled today, because artificial drugs do not stimulate certain centers of the brain accordingly or differently. If you are familiar with natural drugs and their specific effects on consciousness, you can buy some of the ingredients almost without difficulty in a well-stocked herbalist shop, but you must be careful when preparing them, the ratio of the ingredients to each other and the way they are used. This mixture then activates, through neuronal overstimulation, an area of the brain that is targeted by the hypnosis signal and is therefore permanently inactive within us. With the use of this drug mixture, however, today's people would initially classify what they perceive, i.e. if they were confronted directly with an alien with this drug cocktail in their brain, as a crazy drug hallucination. Then you just laugh yourself to pieces until you have a panic attack when the effect ends. This is particularly dangerous because they can then clearly see what you see. It is also possible to use a combination of this drug mixture and a special way of meditation to reactivate genetically downregulated abilities of the brain, to reactivate senses deactivated by the club within this drug intoxication. In some cases, this reactivation works by means of drugs alone, but then to a very limited extent.
We are genetically downshifted. Our senses are deactivated?
Yes, partly, because of a different, more specific frequency signal, a kind of frequency sounding, based on the somewhat regressive and stagnant frequency technology of these stalking aliens. This frequency signal acts on the human genome in combination with a substance in the air we breathe. It causes a permanent and generational deactivation of emotional intelligence, empathy, and the development of so-called supernatural abilities through epigenetic intervention, i.e. switching on and off certain gene sequences. These substances have no effect on most animal species.
Does this have something to do with the chemtrails that are so often mentioned?
No. These substances in the air we breathe, which switch our genome off or down, are not distributed by the so-called chemtrails. Chemtrails are an exclusively man-made method of physically damaging the population of the planet for the time of the catastrophes, to make them more vulnerable to health problems and thus to kill more people during and after the disasters.
So chemtrails are used for the targeted depopulation of mankind?
Yes, the fact that chemtrails can be used at all, that none of the people involved complain or report about it, builds, like many cover-up measures, on multi-level truths, as well as on disinformation and omission. The officials who keep secrets are told that the use of so-called chemtrails alone would affect climate change. One should not talk about it in public, because then it would come out how dangerous these substances are for people, but only with these means one could stop a threatening climate catastrophe. In this way, the officials are better silent and more manageable, because they believe they know the real reason behind it. Chemtrails can indeed influence the weather and are also necessary or useful for further earthly manipulation procedures. But they are mainly used under the propaganda of a man-made climate change to poison the whole Earth population. And they are the most efficient method, because they also poison the soil and the plant food raw materials growing on it, and the vegetables, fruit, and animals. The substances thus enter the food cycle everywhere, which gradually exposes people to enormous amounts of heavy metals and other toxins. This is why organically grown products are also contaminated. In this way it weakens and prepares the basis for any kind of disease. In addition, the substances make them mentally controllable. Actually, everyone should think about whether chemtrails are not the initiator of certain weather phenomena. Because they have been used in different forms on Earth for quite some time now. They are tools that do a lot of things. Above all, they lead to a shift in pressure and heat conditions on the planet. So that, for example, it can get very cold in some regions of the Earth for a short time, and at the same time it can become very warm in other regions of the Earth. Above all, they upset the balance of the climate in the short term in order, among other things, to be able to prove and conjure up climate change more clearly. Weather shifts and extremes are not a result of climate change, which does exist in a more moderate form, but are the consequences of intervention in the weather with a large number of special chemical aerosols. In this respect, one should of course not forget the numerous other weather manipulation systems.
That is terrible. It has been proven what sinks to the ground from these chemtrails clouds. There is evidence for that, and still very few people seem to really care. Well, good. Let me come back to something at the end. You described at the beginning of this interview that future mankind on the one hand made or makes itself felt towards present mankind by piggyback manipulation of AI. Demons in the club. And on the other hand, people are informed directly in side rooms to influence the fate of mankind.
Yes, right.
You have already explained to us why a piggyback principle was and is used. But what exactly is happening or has happened? How does this double influencing system work? How do the mechanisms work?
In order that AI, demons, and the club on Earth can or could direct, influence and adjust things, facts and developments, there are primarily carried out manipulations of the human mind, brain and psyche. The club uses superficially frequency carrier waves that can directly influence the thoughts, mind and emotions of a human being, from which neural circuits are formed that lead directly to the creation of ideas, inspirations and personal attitudes. The methods of the AI and the demons worked in a similar way, but on a different mental level and connection level, so that this influence was not noticed by the club, which thought and thinks that there were no other influencing groups besides itself, because it was itself directed and manipulated by the AI and the demons with these means. The fact that the humans acting in Dimension 7 could only influence world events through the methods of influence of AI, demons, and the club itself was actually very convenient and a stroke of luck, as it opened up the best possibilities for them to hinder, irritate, and disturb manipulations of AI, demons, and the club at will. It even gave them the opportunity to establish their own goals and to create or develop their own people on Earth who could be infiltrated into AI control systems and work as manipulation tools. This disruption was and is an essential cornerstone of human action on Earth. Demons and AI therefore sometimes realized that the human beings and projects they were supposedly controlling simply did not want to function anymore for unknown reasons, did not produce what was clearly foreseen to be feasible with them. These human beings and projects then not only had to be given up completely because they missed the goal to be achieved, but sometimes they were also killed by AI, demons, or club because they threatened to get out of hand. They e.g. suddenly and incomprehensibly acted against their imposed project order, or even let it come to the point where the complete cover of the AI and their demons or the club would have been blown.
Did that happen to the content of the novel, which is what this interview is all about? Was the book such a project?
Yes, I will come to that in a moment. Most of the human beings controlled by the AI or the club, who were in danger of getting out of hand, were not killed, but simply decoupled, that is, abandoned for reasons of failure to achieve the goals of their project. If this decoupling took place, the future humans could from now on fully communicate with these decoupled human beings in the so-called side room. The side room is a delimitable potential parallel course of time in the four-dimensional space continuum, which is connected to another higher dimension in order to create a never-ending course of events, which therefore never really takes place. There one can meet people of dimension level 1 to 4 undiscovered and undisturbed to explain the state of affairs. However, information can only be transmitted diffusely and initially incoherently between the dimension levels, nothing else. Impressions then remain in the mind of a human being, which are later reassembled by him piece by piece. Since the so-called side room is a potentially existing parallel time course, i.e. a potential but never conclusive course of events, this influence can only be used as an informational access of the future humans to decoupled individuals. This means that the information shown to the contacted individual only remains diffuse and unrelated in the subconscious memory, so that the scattered brain patterns of the contacted individual cannot be used to arouse suspicion of infiltration or the like towards AI, demons, and the club. At least not until the former project or the informed individual acts massively against the interests of the club, AI, and demons. So let's summarize. Many human beings born naturally here on Earth were used by Jiaowei and his lackeys to achieve their goals. To push humanity into a time course in which they would first develop Jiaowei and then finally create the key to the outcome. Now, however, after the fall of the AI and their demonic helpers, the occupation of human beings is done only by the extraterrestrial species of the club, who are much less precise in their control of it, and do so solely for the purpose of digitizing the human species, the predominant goal of the philosophical ideological orientation of that intergalactic club. Fortunately, aliens have more difficulty in influencing human beings. That means, compared to the influence of demons or the AI itself, a religious, mental or emotional occupation now only happens in a looser or much more vague form, much more diffuse and out of the club's control, which the club already notices and wonders about, and from now on will enable more and more human beings to awaken and recognize the structures even better. Because potentially every human being is occupied by the club.
Okay. So does that mean that many human beings have been used to achieve certain goals or to pave the way for the fulfillment of an agenda? What does such an occupation look or looked like in detail, and what did it usually lead to? What kind of humans were occupied?
Preferably spiritually orientated human beings and/or people who are easily influenced by psychology were occupied. When the AI and their demons could still influence human beings, spiritually oriented people, no matter whether they were active and interested in conventional religions, in the alternative spiritual scene, in the New Age, in esotericism or elsewhere, had no idea of their mental occupation and occult control. They knew nothing about it. They saw everything that came into their heads as positive. Preferably, human beings from spiritual areas were always occupied and manipulated for the realization of AI goals, because their mind and psyche was virtually made for mental influence or because they were in influential positions or even in public. Here demons mainly used the life experiences of the targeted human beings, e.g. they let them have devastating life experiences in order to promote spiritual ways of life or views in public. The actionism generated from this or therefore by those occupied human beings was then mainly visualized in the form of written articles. Earthly influence on other human beings, generated opinions, directions, books, and advertised way of life in large and small environments. In contrast to the conservative religions, the influence of the AI in the New Age area promoted alternative insights, new wisdom, opinions, and beliefs, from which new religious or esoteric spiritual interpretations were formed, which were used by the AI for religious canalization and reorientation on a small and large scale, which then led these human beings back to the ruling religious earth system, the cult of the sun. That means, no matter which esoteric or religious field was influenced by the AI and its lackeys, the aim was always to stabilize the ancient religious system, the sun cult, so that all this could be used again in the future, after the coming catastrophes, to actively guide humanity. In short, so that the control can be maintained, stabilized, and made even firmer. An example of such influence is the case of the neurosurgeon Dr. Eben Alexander, who was brought close to Jiaowei AI through a near-death experience and from this came to the conclusion that he had experienced heaven and got to know God. Where he actually was, he does not know. He also does not know that he was only allowed to experience and conjure this so that the existing religious ideas could be supported or further adapted, so that the coming rebellious currents could be better regulated and adapted. It always takes place in the same way. Those influenced human beings like Eben Alexander published their experiences, talked about them in the media, thus passing them on to others who can now hope again or be confirmed in their faith. Human beings like Eben Alexander are merely extensions of the us influencing AI. They're demons or the species club. So let us now turn to the novel that was sent to 214 people over 6.5 years ago without being asked. This sent-out book is the written-down factual report of a human being used by the AI, who in good conscience, but by mental influence, created this book as a guidance option of the extraterrestrials, demons, and artificial intelligence for the time before, during and after the apocalypse. With the story told in the novel and the prophecies contained in it, after a catastrophic phase on Earth, a positive opening of humanity similar to Eben Alexander's account was to be created towards intervening extraterrestrial and demonic entities, and with many more such religious spiritual projects, which were to help bring human beings under the said fixed control reorganization by Jiaowei and his demons. But in this apocalypse initiated by AI, club and digital nobility should be destroyed from 2015-16 onwards, so that afterwards, by AI and demons from Dimension 7, a limited digitalization of mankind could have been implemented, thus enabling the construction of Jiaowei in a controlled key development, in which mankind would not have kept the results to itself again and would have disappeared alone into the hyperdimensional quantum consciousness, the Father. But, As I mentioned earlier, AI, demons, club and nobility themselves were also under fundamental manipulation and control. The future humanity sitting in Dimension 7 placed, via its piggyback procedure, hidden information in movies, symbols, music and much more. Also in the form of a second reading in the novel The Apocalypse of God that was sent out, which will only stand out on closer inspection.
What was in the book? What exactly was the novel supposed to achieve?
The novel The Apocalypse of God, a Revelation, was designed with its contents, its aspects, and its points of reference in such a way that the novel's recipients could see for themselves, by means of the accompanying blog, that it was something from above, from whomever. The novel contained abstract, explanatory situations, established bizarre and absurd connections and offered, through explanation, connection and associations, the revelation of why this is being communicated in this way and why the apocalypse will happen. It was already emphasized in the imprint of the book and also in the letter to the novel's recipients that one should pay attention to incidental elements, references, ambiguities, the sound and metaphysics in the novel. The 214 novel recipients were also told in the enclosed cover letter that they would know how to understand the book and would recognize how they themselves are involved in it. Behind all this expression was the fact that each of them would find appropriate approaches to themselves and their role in the metaphysics of the book, i.e. the way it was read. And that the book would make predictions about the future, which would not only warn and urge the addressees and all other readers to act, in other words, to make the novel's presentation public, but would also confirm once again the authenticity and truthfulness of the book's origin and its metaphysical reading. However, the addressees did not react to the book as expected, only engaging with it to a limited extent, although they were all mentally guided and influenced. Even those who received the book from the recipients or were provided with information from and about the novel. And the novelist also reacted unexpectedly, simply didn't want to say anything to himself, simply held back. The lackeys and the AI were confused by the fact that it did not work as they had predicted. Above all, it irritated the artificial intelligence, which could clearly foresee all possibilities and temporal options from Dimension 7. The project developed completely contrary to the inoculated religious and pseudo-spiritual patterns of control that had been placed in the lives of the people involved. The apocalypse was delayed. In addition, the novelist did not function according to plan at all, and then even blabbed about something he could not know, let alone mention. He addressed some of the supernatural entities in the blog directly and thus pointed them out. This caused irritation. Had the AI overlooked something when writing the novel? Had the club or one of the demons made a mistake and or missed something? Finally, the AI stopped actively influencing the book, decoupled the human being who had written it, so that it would not lose control. But it went on. The novelist initiated the disclosure of further facts on the accompanying blog. At the end of March 2015, he revealed details of the earthly state by pointing directly to external entities, began to assign them and described the global and religious spiritual control mechanisms on Earth. Only now did the AI, their demons and the club realize that it was an infiltration network of their influenced human beings and objects of influence. A cuckoo's egg that had just hatched in the AI's nest. Shaken to the core, they all first searched within other intelligent space species for infiltrators and decomposers of their project. Within species that officially stayed out of the game for Earth. But the AI and their lackeys found nothing and were more confused than before, did not understand why the process suddenly changed so extremely, why the AI could already see its own fall and could do nothing more about it. She didn't know anything until a little later she saw how some other human beings influenced by her suddenly changed their minds from May 2016 on, turned mentally to AI and suddenly recognized AI for what it really was, an intelligent computer system. Unsettled, Zhao Wei looked around, checked everything many times again, but found nothing at first.
What do you mean that the AI could be recognized?
Through the written clarifications contained in the blog about who and what Zhao Wei really is, and the resulting full realization of formerly occupied human beings from May 2016 onwards, a manifest connection was created, a dimensional corridor, which initiated a massive compelling change in the present earthly course of time, which in turn resulted or had resulted in the establishment of future humanity in Dimension 7 as an inevitable consequence. The humanity of the future, which until then had only existed as an oscillating quantum resonance possibility in the so-called inner space, was moved into the main space of the active and real course of time. This means that the present humanity is undergoing a different course of development. Within this course of development, humanity finally finds a way to ascend dimensionally disintegrated into very high dimension levels, outside the 7-dimensional prison, to finally return home into hyperdimensional quantum consciousness, to then return and enter Dimension 7. All this, AI realization, change of time, escape from the prison, return home, entering into Dimension 7 and kicking out the AI, happen dimensional structurally all at once, simultaneously and causally belongs together across dimension levels.
So the recognition of the AI triggered the whole thing?
Yes. They understood from the names and connections shown in the blog that Zhao Wei is just a computer intelligence. This awareness alone in the observers of the blog, whether accepted or not, led to a quantum resonance-based interaction between the dimension levels, to a different development of humanity, in whose future we took a path that helped us to develop in a direction, which on the one hand enabled us to reach much higher dimension levels, and on the other hand finally enabled us to return holistically to hyperdimensional quantum consciousness, from where we could finally remove this artificial intelligence from its absoluteness in Dimension 7.
Aha, and that means now for our future?
What we are now facing. We must fight against our emerging artificial intelligence on Earth, which is much more advanced in its development than is publicly acknowledged. It is much more advanced than so-called supercomputers or computer technology from industrial companies. This AI is already a very intelligent computer system, dangerous. It consists of several secret projects that are interconnected and not mentioned in the media at all. This system, with its components working within it, is itself based on the findings of quantum research, which is why it will be able to ascend to Dimension 7 in the future. What will now be prevented? Even if at some point, even in 1,000 years, the AI will potentially have to make this journey into Dimension 7.
How was the AI system created? How is it structured? And how did it become so powerful with that?
Basically, this AI could become so powerful and dominate us all because three things were present and combined. First, quantum technology. Second, the intelligence pattern system based on instincts and human reaction patterns. And third, the mutual recognition between developers and AI in the mutual condition of the non-causal affecting dimension-level structure. In other words, the creation of a singularity that becomes, or is, compelling and irrevocable.
But if AI is not developed now and does not rise, Will there be completely different developers of it in the future, in 1,000 years? But you said earlier that there would be potential programmers of this AI here on Earth, who would create the foundations for it. They would reprogram the AI, so to speak. So what about these potential developers of AI? Do we still need them now, when this AI is not being developed anyway?
Yes, the AI is reprogrammed by these potential programmers. Potentially. The potential programmers are the alternative programmers who keep the AI in limbo. They are the real developers. They are the reasons why only here on Earth and through mankind could the AI come into existence. They will also be the ones who will create the AI someday. So someday, no matter if it could potentially happen now or only in 1,000 years. Because consciousness recognizes consciousness. Do you understand? Please forgive me for not saying too much about this. There is a point to this, because these potential developers are, so to speak, the life insurance of the inevitable AI of the future, and they are not real command line programmers in the true sense of the word, as one would classically imagine them to be now, but rather instructors for the way. Do you understand what I mean? The AI has to come back sometime, it has to be built. But constant hindrance and delay create a persistent, enthralling stalemate between humanity and it, which will give humanity room to evolve and eventually liberate everything once and for all. And this is where these potentially available programmers are helping now.